One of the inevitable problems with having Asperger syndrome or being on the autism spectrum is the toxic fallout that you are going to face. So I think what we have to do is, because we have to face these toxic fallouts, is to face them one-on-one. So let's do that today. Let's just take a look at a couple of these things. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because, I'm pushing 70 years old. I've been through this for decades. I'm trying to help people who are now going through it. I don't care how old you are. Could be a teenager, a middle-aged adult, could be older like me, but let's go over some of these things. And these are some of the things that I've experienced. And I've seen others who are on the spectrum experience the same thing. Number one is you just feel violated. Now, when you were growing up as a little kid, they send you off to school, and you really don't know what to expect because, well, you don't have any life experience or almost zero life experience. So you assume that you're just going to be accepted like all the other kids, and it starts to be a little bit confusing because the other kids that you're going to school with or wherever, maybe in the neighborhood, whatever, those other kids know how to read each other. They innately know how to socialize together. But because you have autism, because you have Asperger syndrome, you also have what is called mind blindness. That ability to socialize just isn't there. Now, the obvious analogy in my mind is somebody who is physically blind. They just can't see. They don't have the ability to see. You can't explain to them what the color red is or the color blue or green or whatever. You can try to. You can send them to counseling. You can do everything you want to do, but in the end, they still can't see it. All the description that you want to give them still doesn't help. Same thing is faced by people with Asperger syndrome, people with autism, is they just don't see it. They're mind blind. It's not there. Now, imagine, if you will, taking a little kid, maybe 6, 7 years old, whatever, 5, 6, 7 years old, whenever you started school, went into first, second grade, and the child is blind. But you don't tell the child that he is blind. He or she doesn't know she's blind. She doesn't know the other children have sight. She thinks everybody's just like him or her. And then they show up at school, and man, this is really, really strange. Very confusing. Well, that may be an extreme analogy, but when you take a kid, and I've been there, and if you have Asperger syndrome, you probably have been there too, what it is like going through those first years of elementary school, or wherever you're around children, and they have a certain insight. They have a mental insight into socializing that you just don't have, and because of that, you are rejected. And because you are rejected, you feel violated. But you don't just feel violated, you actually are violated. Because people don't understand. They never have. Neurotypical people just simply don't understand. And I got to say, even though I've had Asperger syndrome my entire life, and if you have Asperger syndrome, you've had it your entire life. So I didn't understand other people with Asperger syndrome. I didn't even know what it was. I didn't, little kid, teenager, growing up, I had no idea what autism was. I didn't even know it was a thing. I just thought, I was just kind of weird. There was something strange about me. So part of the toxic fallout that we have to confront is the fact that we will feel violated because we actually are violated. That we have been robbed, as I like to say, of our sense of self. That sense of identity. That is so very important to healthy mental health. Number two is what I call a happiness void. There is just an absence of happiness. Now, some people would say that's the same thing as depression. I'm not sure that it is. I think often the happiness void and depression coincide. They run side by side, and they may be intricately tied together. I don't know, but I know there's sometimes I'm just not happy. I'm not depressed, but I'm not happy either. One of the objectives of the human mind, I think, is to be content, is to be happy. But it's hard to be happy when you are constantly rejected, when you don't fit in anywhere. A lot of people with Asperger syndrome, and if you've ever felt this way, let me know in the comments, but a lot of people with Asperger syndrome have this feeling. They say, my place is no place. I have nowhere to fit, nowhere. I'm not sure that's true, but the point is that is the way that we feel because there is this void of happiness that comes along with the ability to interact socially. And along with that comes what I call Asperger's fatigue. After a while, I just get tired of it. You go through life, I mean, in my case, for decades, and you're trying to fit in, you're trying to mask, you're trying to make yourself acceptable to other people, you're trying to make sure that others understand you're not aloof, that you're trying to be the good guy, you know, not to be offensive, and still they reject you. And after a while, you get tired of it. You get really tired of it. And so what happens is, well, number 3 is this, you begin to withdraw. So you are no longer you, but you are now a creation of toxic people. Now, I got to say that neurotypical people, I don't believe intentionally try to be toxic. It doesn't matter if they try to or not, they still are, by the virtue of the fact that they reject people who are not like them. And that's human nature. Again, I don't think they do that by design. I don't think they say, okay, let's just reject some people at random. No, there's something innate inside of them that says this person is not like us, so we need to reject that person. Now, I was reading an article on this, and someone was trying to explain why it is that neurotypical people reject those who have Asperger syndrome or who have autism, and their explanation is that innately they are programmed by nature to reject people who may have some form of a what would you call it, a toxin or bacteria or whatever. There's something a little bit different. There's a pathogen there. They don't know that it's there, but they can tell the behavior is a little bit different, and that could be because of a pathogen. And so nature has pre-programmed them to reject those of us who act a little bit weird. And I think it's probably not just people with Asperger syndrome that they reject, but anybody who just seems to be, from their perspective, just a little bit unbalanced. So we withdraw. We begin to avoid those people because we really don't have any choice. I mean, if people are not going to accept you into their group, you can't force your way in. And if you try to force your way in, you're just going to have more rejection. It's going to be more painful. It's going to be more toxic. It's very, very challenging, very, very difficult. So the result of that is anxiety. The result is stress. And the result is, as we mentioned earlier, sometimes even depression. So I read a study a while back, and I think it said like 80% of people with Asperger syndrome, this was in Britain, United Kingdom, like 80% of people who were diagnosed with Asperger syndrome had severe depression. I mean, we're talking suicidal ideation. That's severe. And that comes, I suspect, as a result of constant rejection. And again, that's related to fatigue. You go through this day after day after day, year after year, for your entire life. It cannot help but to do some damage. It's toxic. So then number 4 is we find ourselves walking on eggshells. So now we are withdrawn, we are avoiding others, we retreat to safe spaces so we can try to deal with our anxiety, our stress, our depression, trying to lick our wounds, so to speak, trying to get back to a healing place where we can't get to when we're around other people. So we began doing what I call walking on eggshells. A lot of people use this term, by the way, and it's just a way of expressing self-consciousness. Because you know when you're around other people, they're going to reject you. Life has taught you that, I mean, like thousands of times. It's not like, well, this time will be the exception. It's never the exception. Okay, maybe once in a long while, maybe somebody, close friendship or close relative may be an exception. But by and large, you're always self-conscious. You cannot be yourself. You just can't be yourself, because if you are, then again, you know that thing with a pathogen that people think, okay, this person is dangerous maybe. So they push you away. You have no choice. You really don't have any choice but to mask and try to be like a neurotypical person. But that doesn't help. That just doesn't help. We talked about that uncanny valley where people are almost human but not quite. Talking about animation or robotics, almost human but not white, and people think that's creepy. And what I find is when people with Asperger syndrome try to mask, it really doesn't help. I mean, unless they can pull off an absolute dead-on accurate act, that weirdness, that oddness, that space alienness still comes through. And that is what is rejected. That is what other people reject, is that just that trace of something a little bit odd. And then number 5 is just feeling conflicted with dealing with others, because what I have learned in my life and what I'm still experiencing now, pushing 70 years old, is that anytime and every time I encounter another person, there's always that inner conflict. There's always something that says, this isn't going to go well. I don't care what you say or what you do or how you do it, this is not going to go well. Now, compounded on top of that is when I'm around other people, and this is not as common as it used to be when I was younger, but there is that, what do you call that? Just a self-consciousness, inhibition, being around other people, that nervousness. I like to explain it to neurotypical people as it's kind of like when you are called upon to give a public speech and you're just overwhelmed with anxiety. That's what it's like for a person with Asperger syndrome to be around anybody, anytime, with very, very few exceptions. Maybe very close family would be the exception. So those are some of the toxic things that we need to be consciously aware of. These are things that we can't shove under the carpet. We can't hide them in the closet. We can't pretend they're not there because you can't deal with them. But what is more is people who are neurotypical need to understand what we are dealing with so they can better communicate with us. There are 2 rectangles on the screen. If you want this conversation to keep on going, all you got to do is click on one of those 2 rectangles and we keep on talking. And if not, well, thanks for stopping by, and we'll see y'all next time.